Hi guys, I hope you're well. I want to talk about identity today, and I think the question of whether transgender people, for example, transgender men, feel like men or trans men is a very interesting one, and it's of course completely subjective. I can only offer my opinion, so the topic has no right or wrong answer. And I'd like to invite my trans viewers to share their opinions in the comments as well, because I want to look at why some people are proud to be transgender and they hold it as a very important part of their identity, and why some trans people altogether identify as trans rather than as the gender they transition to. And I also spoke with another YouTuber called Miss Misanthropist. She's an awesome anti feminist blogger and she applies logic and reason and utilizes evidence to debunk feminist bullshit. And she does make different kinds of videos as well. And we ended up having a chat together where we were talking a lot about anti SJW stances on transgender issues. So I'll link her channel and the chat that we had below, and you should definitely check it out. But for this video, let's start off by looking at what some transgender men have to say about their identity.
I never wanted my, transition to define me, but I'm okay with it. I'm okay being the trans guy. I'm okay being a face of a trans guy, or like the face of, transgender, or whatever the fuck you want to say.
If I identify as a trans guy or a guy. So I think basically the simple answer for that is within myself, I identify as a trans guy. I constantly acknowledge my trans experience, my past, my present, and my future all as one line, and I'm proud to be a trans guy. I think that being trans is one of many identities I hold, but it is one of the most important ones to me just because it has really shaped who I've become.
A lot of times I can get pretty down on myself asking, why am I trans? Why do I have to be this way? And all that stuff. So I wanted to make this video a little bit different. So it's going to be 10 reasons why I'm glad I'm trans.
Yeah, all the videos are linked in the description if you're interested in watching the whole thing, but I'm more interested in what all these guys have in common. They're all perfectly happy to be trans and to identify as trans men rather than men. They see their so-called trans experience as being a defining part of who they are and thus see themselves as trans men before they see themselves as men. And as you all probably know already, I identify as a man. That's why I transitioned in the first place. I live as what many SJWs call stealth, which means there are plenty of people in my life who don't know that I'm trans because I don't tell people. And here's where I may potentially piss off some perfectly reasonable trans people. I don't agree that the so-called trans experience is important. I don't understand why any trans man would identify as trans over identifying as male. It seems counterproductive to me. I'm not saying that these lads are wrong, it's their choice to identify however the fuck they want. But if you want to be accepted as a guy, then why would you tell people that you're not a man, you're a trans man? You know, the whole point of transition is to live as a man for a trans man and to live as a woman for a trans woman. And if you are doing so successfully, it just seems completely pointless to me to inform people that you're trans. It's different, of course, with partners, and you are obliged to inform anyone that you could potentially be getting intimate with that you're trans. That should be one of the very first things that you do before you take the relationship any further. But just in general, I don't get it. Whether you like it or not, plenty of people in this world don't see trans men as real men and trans women as real women. So if you're going to be very open about it and identify as and announce to the world that you're trans, then you cannot complain if people treat you differently. Is that fair? Not particularly, but that's life.
For me personally, and it's totally okay if you feel different, but for me personally, I'm really happy that I've gotten the transgender experience. I'm really grateful for my experience being transgender. For me, it's opened a lot of doors. My transition wasn't as rough as other people's was. I have a lot of privilege in that way.
This kid is very different from the first three shown because I don't think they're trans. This isn't just because I think saying that you can be grateful for being trans is complete bullshit, but because they don't wish to take hormones, and according to BuzzFeed, because fucking surprise, surprise, of course they've been on it, they don't think that taking hormones makes them any less of a man. Except it does, because in order to be transgender, you need to transition from one gender to the opposite gender, and simply cutting your hair and changing your name doesn't make you a man. Anyone with a good head on their shoulders knows that BuzzFeed is fucking cancer. So the fact that BuzzFeed will sit there and say that you can basically be a girl, cut your hair, sling on some guy's clothes, call yourself a man, and you're no less of a man, it's fucking retarded.
What would happen if we didn't have the term cisgender? As an alternative, many simply use the phrase non-trans, but that creates a barrier. It implies a wall exists between cisgender people and genderqueer and transgender people. Under that mentality, there is the LGBTQA community, and then everyone else. It paints transgender and genderqueer people as other, so different and foreign that they require a label while everyone else doesn't. Not only that, but if cisgender people didn't have a title, there would be a lack of place for them in the queer community. Try to imagine walking into a place where everyone has categories, names, groupings for themselves. While these names can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, they provide everyone with a sense of place, of purpose, of identity. When you ask, where do I belong, you're told that there really isn't a specific place for someone like you. You don't belong. Not the most inviting environment. With the term cisgender, we provide a place where people who are outside of the queer community can be invited in to learn and to explore. It can give somebody a sense of self.
First of all, I don't understand why a person calling themselves non-trans creates any more fucking barriers than a person who calls themselves cisgender, seeing as cisgender literally means someone who is not transgender. And secondly, why would non-trans people need a place in the quote queer community? For anyone who's watched my previous videos, you'll know that I don't consider myself a part of the transgender community simply because I happen to be trans. The community exists to give support to people who want it, and I fail to understand why cisgender people or heterosexual people would feel the fucking need to belong in the transgender or homosexual community. We return here to this obsession that SJWs have with labels and categories, and they're obsessed because they like to rank people by privilege. You need to admit you're straight or cisgender so you can be told to check your privilege. So to all my straight, non-trans viewers from a transgender person, don't let these people guilt trip you for being who you are, and don't let anyone slap labels onto you. Fuck these arseholes, and never feel the need to apologise for oppressing or bullying anyone simply by existing. We do not need to be told how to think or how to view ourselves in order to have a sense of self, and screw anyone who demands otherwise. People are people, and if you want to be a part of a community, fine, go ahead. But enough with the boxing people up into neat little categories.
Transphobic people seem to have this idea that if you're not being intentionally transphobic, it doesn't count. But many don't seem to consider that cisnormativity is what creates transphobia and makes it dangerous for us to exist. Internalized transphobia and cisnormativity are just as much problems as deliberate hate, and if you're not willing to take ownership of that as an ally, then you're not really helping.
Cisnormativity is another one of these completely retarded terms made up to please immature spoiled brats, and it refers to the assumption that most people are not trans. Except, of course, the fact is that most people are not trans. We are being told that believing facts is transphobic, and this really underlines why the whole transgender SJW train of thought is not only ridiculous, but also harmful. It's harmful because it is indoctrinating normal young people into feeling that they are full of hatred simply for speaking honestly and refusing to self-censor to cater to the easily offended. So when this retard says that you're not really helping, trust me, she's paying you a compliment.
Whenever you equate gender with genitals, that's cisnormative. Even statements such as talking about women having periods are completely cisnormative because guess what? Men have periods too, so do non-binary people. Plenty of people have periods. How do you overcome this? Instead of talking about women when you're talking about menstruation, just say people who menstruate or people with a uterus who can menstruate, because even some people with a uterus aren't reproductive in that way.
Number 1, there is no such thing as non-binary people. Number 2, yes, only women can have periods because when women menstruate, their body is shedding the lining of their uterus through an opening in their cervix, which is a part of the female reproductive system. Men cannot have periods. Sure, trans men who have not started to transition yet will have periods, but that's because they are not biologically female. I'm not going to be policed in my speech by some delusional little cunt who needs to spend more time studying biology than she does ramming her nose into gender studies books.
Normativity is prevalent in the whole world in general. It even permeates medical discourse. When people are talking about males as having one set of secondary sex characteristics, genitals, and hormones, they're being cisnormative, because not all males have those sorts of characteristics in the same way not all females have those characteristics. TERFs, or trans-exclusionary feminists, also have the issue of equating feminism with genitals. You'll see vaginas on things which are meant to be for female empowerment, and they'll talk about normalizing all these things which only apply to cis females. Feminism isn't only for cis people, feminism is for trans women as well.
Did you hear that, professionals? It doesn't matter if you spend several years practicing medicine at medical school, you're transphobic for not disregarding basic biological facts in order to keep the gender police happy. Now, I don't like third wave feminism. In fact, I strongly detest it, and I think it's a disgrace to feminism, and it's utterly unnecessary in the West today. And I've had my fair share of arguments online with TERFs as well. But I will say this. These women shouldn't be schooled on what it means to be a woman by some uneducated little girl who thinks that men can have periods. Feminism today is complete bullshit. Every rational person knows this, and the TERF movement is a particularly ignorant branch. But even I can stand back and take an objective look at why they've grown so hostile to trans women. Granted, they're still small-minded and ignorant to assume that just because they've received a hostile response from some trans women, that all trans women are equally delusional. We know this isn't true. But it must be pretty frustrating for a biological woman to be told by a biological man what is good for women. As much as I dislike TERFs because they're all retarded and poisonous and ill-informed, I equally dislike the SJW trans people who disregard facts and cry transphobia at the first sign of dissent. Maybe the TERFs and the SJW trans people can join together in their shared refusal to put logic over feelings for just 5 fucking minutes. If you're a trans woman who identifies as a woman, fine, good for you. But if you don't identify as a woman and instead prefer to identify as a trans woman, don't walk into a feminist space and expect those crazy bitches to take kindly to you, because it's not going to fucking happen. The same idiots who prance around crying about rape culture and video game misogyny, both of which are myths, also view masculinity as inherently bad. Masculinity, as with femininity, is perfectly normal, and together they help to create a harmonious society for both men and women. But look at this. The world at large still believes that man equals penis and woman equals absence of penis. Wow, that's just fucking insane, isn't it? It's not like most men have penises and most women have vaginas, is it? They say this is phallocentric, transmisogynistic, and transphobic, and incredibly limiting. I'm worried that some people will judge me as less trans and less masculine, and I used to worry about transitioning, in part because I was worried that I would never live up to the standard of masculine attractiveness. It felt like it would be better to be perceived as an attractive woman rather than fail at being masculine in the eyes of the world. Well, that's your problem, sweetheart, not ours. If you have issues or worries, you deal with them. Stop trying to change the world to fix your own problems, you selfish bastard. Because trans people are such a tiny minority of the population, we're more likely to be categorised as one and the same. As I say in all my videos, this is what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to combat. I'm very aware of the amount of retarded trans people out there, and I'd very much like to show the world that we're not all the same. I'd sooner swallow a bottle of fucking bleach than I would join the ranks of these virtue signalling sheep. Then we get things like this popping up, about how trans people can pass as a man or a woman. Quote, "Passing to me seems to be about 2 things, making sure others see our gender as we wish them to, but also about survival. As such, although I'm inclined to argue that we should try to downplay the importance of passing in trans communities, after all, not everyone can pass, and you can spend so long worrying about it that you barely end up leaving the house, I think people have every right to work towards passing. Anything that minimises public harassment has to be a good thing. Listen, trans people don't wish to pass simply in order to avoid public harassment. Trans people transition because that's what being transgender is. It's wanting to pass and live as the opposite sex. How is this difficult to understand? Cisness is invisible. The erasure of trans people in our cultures means that the models of man and woman are inherently cis. This is why trans women don't just have to assert their identity in order to be accepted as a woman, they also have to look cis. It's not enough to fit within social norms and roles as women, but also to undergo hormone therapy and surgery. It's not just about having breasts and a vagina, it's about looking like you were born that way. Precisely. Well done, you got something right. I think it's important to talk explicitly about passing as cis. When we're talking about passing as a woman, we always imply passing as a cis woman, but we don't think about what this means. Oh, for fuck's sake. No, we do think about what this means. It means there are two genders. You can be a man or a woman, and if you're transgender, you will want to transition in order to be seen as and live as, i.e. pass as, the opposite sex. That's the fucking point. This isn't rocket science. I can understand why someone who thinks gender and transgender studies is a valid area of expertise would have such difficulty understanding basic common sense. Returning to the title of this video, should transgender people identify as transgender? I personally don't. I identify as a man and I have no problem living and passing as one. Do I think all trans people should do the same? If I'm honest, yes, I do. But if you're a trans man or a trans woman and you value your trans identity so much, then go ahead, identify however you please. I'm not going to try and stop you. But whatever you do, however you identify, accept the reality of your situation. If you're one of these people who think that men can have periods, or that acknowledging most people in the world are not transgender is transphobic, do the world a favour and don't procreate. Trans men are not real biological men. Trans women are not real biological women. And one of the best things that you can do for yourself, for your own mental health, is to accept and understand this and stop trying to worm your way into universities and into other people's business and tell them that they need to disregard reality to make you feel better about yourself. It's pathetic and it's childish, and enough is enough.